Hello everyone. I'm just going to make a quick video here to discuss resume best practices, what I'm calling a resume mini lecture. And I hope that you find this to be helpful as you go about drafting your resumes. This is a presentation I've given several times to several different audiences, and you can see that it's called Resumes and Cover Letters, 5 Tips Each. And so obviously I'm just going to go through the first half of this. So I'm going to give you 5 tips that I think are really important about writing an effective resume. So the first thing that I want you to think about is that the resume really is a distilled version of your identity on one page. And so what you are trying to do effectively is to share with your reader your experiences, knowledge, credentials, and skills from possibly a long time on one page. And so that's a challenging task. And what I like to tell people often is that if you are able to write and craft an effective resume, there are very few things you can't write because a resume has to be well formatted, well designed, well executed in terms of its language. It has to be specific and concrete and precise. And it also has to be persuasive, and it has to be really focused on what your reader or audience cares about. So I'm going to go through this at relatively breakneck speed, and please let me know if you have any particular questions, and I'd be happy to answer those questions in a follow-up mini lecture posted maybe early next week after you've had a chance to work on your resumes. So the first thing I want to talk about is the purpose of the resume. So there's 2 misconceptions that people have. One is that the resume alone is going to get them the job. It's not. It's going to get you the interview. And 2, that a resume is meant to show that you are qualified. And I take exception with that because I think when you are applying for a job, most of the people you're applying against are also going to be qualified. They are going to have the basic prerequisites for a position. However, what is usually going to be the distinguishing characteristic or quality is if you are exceptionally and uniquely qualified. So your goal when you're crafting your resume for any position should be to portray a unique and exceptional set of qualifications. The other thing I want you to know is that you should always tailor your resume. And so you should be making really small and sometimes large adjustments based on the audience that's reading your resume and their purpose for reading. So, the example I like to give is that if you graduate our nursing program, you may apply for many different nursing positions. And even though all of them are quote unquote for a registered nurse, they all demand different things. And so you can imagine that somebody applying to work in the emergency department is going to have to show a different set of skills probably than somebody who works in the psychiatric ward. Or the geriatric ward. And so that's just really important for you to keep in mind that it's your job not just to show that you are a nurse, but that you are a nurse that can excel in a particular context and that you are familiar maybe working with a unique population. And partly you can think about the mission or the purpose of an organization and try to tailor the message of your resume around that. So just keep that in mind. So one of the things I encourage people to do is early in the resume writing process, think of a series of words that you want the reader to associate with you after they've read your resume. Maybe it's customer service, or maybe it is hard worker, or whatever it is. And think about those as claims that you're going to need to support with evidence on your resume. So something to think about here is this. These are the 3 things that readers care about when they look at a resume, and this is really the order of importance that they care about them in. First, they care about your technical ability. Can you fundamentally do the job? Do you have the base level requirements checked off? Are you credentialed? Do you have the base level education? Are you certified? Do you have the correct license? Do you have the appropriate and requisite blend of experience and education? And that's the first thing that folks want to see, and they want to see that quickly because, as I'm going to tell you later in this presentation, the average reader only reads a resume for somewhere between 10 and 35 seconds the first time, or 45 seconds the first time. And so they really need to be able to tell quickly that you have the technical ability. After they check that off, the thing that they really care about, and this generally is where people distinguish themselves from others in a pool of applicants, is they want to see that you have supporting skills. And supporting skills are the skills that allow you to do your technical skill or carry out your technical ability at a high level. That traditionally includes things like communication skill, computer skills, organizational skills, managerial or supervisory skills, your ability to work in a fast-paced environment, etc. And these are things that you have to illustrate through concrete and specific detail on your resume. Supporting skills are also the things that allow you to take previous work experiences and transfer them into new work experiences. So if any of you out there are retraining or are switching careers, supporting skills are the things that you can carry with you. A classic example I like to give is that I worked with a graduate of our nursing program on her resume, and of course she was an RN, so she had the baseline requirements. She could check off the technical ability, but she was a little bit concerned about using her previous work experience because she didn't think it was relevant. And I hear that all the time because she, for 25 years, had been a hairdresser in a salon. And so what I challenged her to do, and what we ultimately did together, and what I'm going to challenge you to do, is to think really carefully about how your previous work experience, especially with regard to supporting skills, can transfer to your the new position that you're seeking. In her case, and I'll give you a chance to think about this, what do you think the overlap is, or the transferable supporting skills are, between nursing and hairdressing? Well, maybe you've had a chance to think about it. Maybe you hit pause. I hope you did. And I'm not going to tell you all of them because I'll give you a chance to maybe fill in others. We came up with a really long list. We actually had to trim it back. But one of the most important things, and this falls maybe under communication, is the ability to ask really good questions is something that's valuable in both fields. As a hairdresser, you obviously have to get a sense for what your customer or your client wants. And so you have to be able to ask questions about length, volume, color, etc. And that skill is really important in nursing. As a nurse, you have to be able to ask questions of your patients to find out where the pain is, how severe the pain is, how long the pain is last, what makes the pain go away, etc. The final thing that a reader of a resume cares about, and they can't really find this out through the resume, but in sort of the application and hiring process, the third thing that they care about are favorable personal qualities, and those are almost impossible to show on a resume. You can sort of show them in a cover letter, but they really come through in the interview and the reference checking process, and those are things like, are you kind, are you easy to work with, etc. So we really won't go into those, but you really need to prove your technical ability, and you certainly want to prove that you possess those soft or supporting skills. Tip number 2 is something we'll go into in much greater detail next week, but I just want to point out to you is that you have to think visually. A resume is a document that has to be read really quickly, and so we really can't separate form from content. People are going to make judgments about you based on the way that you choose to format and present your resume. So make sure that it's neat and organized, make sure that it's easy to read, that people can find information quickly and easily, and the ways to do that are the final 2 bullet points on this slide. 1, you have to think in terms of a hierarchy, so you have to put the most important information first, so you really want to show those technical abilities first, and you want to devote space proportionately. And so what that means is you want to devote space on the page, kind of like you would real estate. How you would develop real estate. You want to develop it proportionate to the impact it's going to have on the reader. So the most important and relevant experiences and skills and information are going to get the most space on the page. The other thing that you can do to make your resume more visually appealing and easier to read is you can use really good headings. And by that I mean you can use specific headings that stand out on the page and that guide the reader towards the information that's important to them, kind of like a signpost. So the example I give here is, and you'll see this a lot of times, is you can have a really generic resume that has experience, education, and skills and nothing more. And a lot of things can fit under the heading of experience. So when you add an adjective like clinical or medical or customer service in front of the word experience, it's going to grab the reader's attention. And so I want you to think really carefully about how you can play with those headings to make them more useful to the reader and to allow the reader to find what they need more easily. The third tip that I have for you about resumes is that you can never assume your reader knows anything about your experience. So transferability here is the key. You need to make sure that your skills that you're presenting on the resume transfer well into the position for which you're applying. So what that means is you can't use jargon. So you can't be using insider language from your previous field when you're applying for a new field, because you may be writing to somebody who has no idea what you're talking about. So make sure that you're not using insider language that only people from your previous field know about. So if you're going from food service into retail, you're going to really need to make sure that you're drawing those lines for the reader so that they understand how your previous work relates to your new work. The other thing I want you to think about is that you can't just rest on job titles and positions. Those are not self-evident. A customer service representative in one context is different than a customer service representative in another context. Just like a laborer in one context is different than a laborer in another context. Don't sell yourself short by just using the job titles. Make sure that you illustrate what you did in a position. I'll give you a classic example of this really quickly. Many of my students have been or are laborers, and for some people, they picture a laborer in their mind as being somebody with a shovel moving a big pile of dirt. But we know that there are laborers who oversee crews, who interact directly with the customer or client, who operate heavy equipment, who see jobs through to their completion, etc. And to just tell somebody that you are a laborer might end up selling yourself short. So what I want you to do is underneath any of your entries for work experience or positions, I want you to use bullet points to describe in detail, to illustrate what you did. And remember, the key here is to make those bullet points transferable to the position for which you're applying. And so avoid that jargon. The other thing I want you to do is to use verbs. And a verb is obviously an action, but a verb also tends to illustrate what you've done in really instructive and helpful ways. So I'll give you an example. If you've trained employees in the past, you should have a bullet point that leads with the word train. Well, why is that? Well, it's because a reader can tell a lot about you because you have the ability to train people. Like, think about it. What can you learn or what can you assume about a person if they've trained other employees? Think about that just for a second. Well, you could probably assume that they have knowledge of what they're teaching. They have to know it really well. They can probably communicate really well. They probably are really good at following procedures and policies. They're probably very trustworthy. There's a lot of really important stuff baked into that word train that you won't get if you use really bad limiting verbs. For instance, if you were a laborer and you use a verb like weed whack, that can only mean one thing, right? That you weed whacked. But if you say that you operated equipment safely and effectively, consistently, then that tells us a little bit more. So you're going to want to use those high-value verbs that mean more than just their literal meaning, but that the reader can really sort of read into and learn about you from. This is sort of a guiding principle, but your job with the resume is to show us things, not tell us things. Anybody can tell anybody anything. I can tell you that I'm the greatest customer service representative ever. I can tell you that I work well in a fast-paced environment. I can tell you that I have a strong safety record. What's going to be more memorable and more effective and frankly probably going to lead to definitely going to lead to greater efficacy of your resume is when you show me what that looks like. So give me key details. Show me achievements. Use data to show me your productivity. Take me to that place. Draw a picture of what you did. Illustrate. So hold yourself accountable to that. Show, don't tell. And that's something you're going to hear me say a lot this semester. And finally, it's important for you to be resourceful. Make sure that you're looking at other resumes. Type in resume examples on the internet. Get a sense for what other people are doing. Think about what's going to work well and not work well based on your audience. Test the effectiveness of your resume. Hand it to somebody and say, hey, what do you think I'm applying for based on the information on here? Or what's the most memorable or impressive thing about my resume? Talk to experts in your field and find out what they see and what they like to see. Most importantly, just realize that you don't have to write your resume in a vacuum and that other people are certainly here to help you. That basically concludes my quick lecture about resumes. But if you implement those 5 tips, I think you will be in a very good position. So anyway, signing off.